The 1960s were a decade of rebellion, spectacle, and cinematic risk. But what happens when bold visions collapse under their own ambition? Imagine films laughed out of theaters, buried by critics, or left to rot in studio vaults, only to be resurrected decades later as masterpieces. These weren't just failures. They were disasters that became legends. Tonight, we uncover 20 box office bombs that aged into undeniable classics. Number 20. Cleopatra, 1963. When Cleopatra premiered, it was supposed to be the crowning jewel of 20th Century Fox. Instead, it nearly bankrupted the studio. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's tempestuous love affair overshadowed the movie itself, while its ballooning budget, then the most expensive film ever made, spiraled from a modest estimate to over $40 million. The press mocked it as Hollywood's funeral parade. The story itself was drenched in spectacle. Taylor, as the Egyptian queen, manipulating both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony for power, draped in gowns stitched with real gold thread, walking through sets the size of city blocks. But behind the glamour was chaos, constant rewrites, disastrous production delays, and illnesses that halted filming for months. Audiences expected magic, but the 4-hour runtime left them restless. Critics were split, some dazzled by its success, others weary of its indulgence. Financially, it was a nightmare. 20th Century Fox had to sell off parts of its backlot, birthing the land that later became Century City. And yet, history gave Cleopatra redemption. Its visual majesty influenced historical epics for decades. Taylor's entrance into Rome is still considered one of the most extravagant shots ever filmed. Once ridiculed as Hollywood waste, it is now remembered as Hollywood grandeur. Sometimes, failure itself forges immortality. Number 19. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. Believe it or not, one of the most celebrated films ever made was once branded a commercial misstep. Lawrence of Arabia, David Lean's sweeping desert epic, was slow to catch fire with audiences upon release. Its nearly 4-hour length, lack of romance, and meditative pacing baffled early viewers. For a moment, it seemed destined to fade as an expensive curiosity. The film chronicled the enigmatic T.E. Lawrence, played with eerie intensity by Peter O'Toole, charting his transformation from eccentric British officer to revolutionary hero in the Arab Revolt. But critics at the time called it too long, too dry, too distant. Exhibitors panicked, cutting entire reels to fit showtimes, mutilating Lean's vision. Audiences left confused. Behind the scenes, the production was as grueling as the desert it depicted. Cast and crew endured brutal heat, sandstorms, and endless reshoots. O'Toole nearly died after multiple camel accidents. Even the financing wavered, with Columbia Pictures unsure if Lean's obsessive perfectionism would ever yield profit. But like the desert winds, time shifted everything. A meticulous restoration decades later revealed the film's intended grandeur. The vast dunes, the haunting silence, the moral ambiguity, all of it struck modern audiences with awe. Today, Lawrence of Arabia is regarded as one of the greatest films ever crafted, taught in film schools worldwide. Proof that sometimes the box office misunderstands genius. Number 18. The Leopard, 1963. Luchino Visconti's. The Leopard was hailed in Europe as an artistic triumph, but in America it was branded a disaster. Based on Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa's novel, it told the story of an aging Sicilian prince watching his aristocratic world crumble as revolution swept Italy. With Burt Lancaster cast alongside European stars Alain Delon and Claudia Cardinale, the production seemed designed for international glory. Instead, the American release was butchered. Distributors cut nearly an hour, and Lancaster's voice was dubbed over in places, leaving critics unimpressed and audiences indifferent. It sank at the box office. Many saw it as too long, too European, and too political for the popcorn crowd of the 1960s. Behind the scenes, Lancaster clashed bitterly with Visconti, who had wanted Laurence Olivier for the lead. The actor later admitted he felt like an outsider on the Italian set, and reviewers at the time called him miscast. But the passage of time has been kind. The full-length restoration revealed the Leopard's true majesty. Sweeping ballroom scenes filmed with painterly precision, philosophical dialogue about power and decay, and a haunting final image of aristocracy fading into irrelevance. Today, it's considered one of the greatest historical epics ever filmed, a movie that once fell victim to commercial blindness but now commands reverence. Number 17. The Night of the Iguana, 1964. When John Huston brought Tennessee Williams's steamy stage play to the screen, many expected another streetcar named Desire. Instead, The Night of the Iguana polarized critics and collapsed at the American box office. Its tale of a defrocked clergyman, played by Richard Burton, leading a group of eccentric travelers into emotional chaos at a ramshackle Mexican hotel, was far too raw for mainstream tastes. Audiences balked at its mix of dark humor, sexuality, and despair. The Catholic Church condemned it for irreverence, while some reviewers dismissed it as a sweaty melodrama. MGM executives, unnerved by the controversy, gave it limited support. The behind-the-scenes story was just as wild. Burton was entangled in his scandalous affair with Elizabeth Taylor, who followed him to Mexico and attracted as much attention as the film itself. Gossip columnists gleefully covered the off-screen drama, overshadowing the movie's release. Yet history reevaluated Huston's daring. The performances by Ava Gardner, Deborah Kerr, and Burton are now praised as some of their finest. The storm-lashed cinematography and biting dialogue revealed Williams' themes of repression and release with aching power. Though once dismissed as messy, The Night of the Iguana is now recognized as a courageous, ahead-of-its-time exploration of human weakness. Proof that failure can mature into art. Number 16. Barbarella, 1968. When Barbarella debuted, critics laughed, and not in the way the filmmakers intended. Roger Vadim's psychedelic space opera, starring Jane Fonda as a futuristic adventurer sent to save the universe, was derided as campy nonsense. American audiences ignored it, and it quickly became one of Paramount's more embarrassing financial disappointments of the decade. The plot itself was surreal. Barbarella travels across strange planets, encountering bizarre creatures, villainous scientists, and seductive dangers. Its candy-colored sets and flamboyant costumes made it look more like a pop art experiment than serious science fiction. Reviewers in the 1960s sneered, calling it absurd and soft-headed. Off-screen, tension simmered. Fonda reportedly felt uncomfortable with the role, worried it might overshadow her career with frivolity. Vadim, her then-husband, defended the vision as playful satire, but American distributors marketed it clumsily, alienating audiences expecting either serious sci-fi or straightforward comedy. Yet decades later, Barbarella transformed into a cult classic. Its bold visuals inspired fashion designers, comic book artists, and even filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino. Jane Fonda's performance, once mocked, is now celebrated as an emblem of camp cinema. In failing to fit the expectations of its time, Barbarella secured a permanent place in pop culture, a glittering misfire that became timeless. Number 15. Fahrenheit 451, 1966. François Truffaut's English-language debut was bound to be controversial. Adapted from Ray Bradbury's dystopian novel, Fahrenheit 451 imagined a future where firemen burned books instead of saving homes. With Oscar Werner as the conflicted fireman and Julie Christie in dual roles, the film aimed to capture Bradbury's haunting vision. But American critics dismissed it as flat and lifeless. They claimed Werner's performance lacked passion, while Truffaut's decision to shoot in English created an awkward rhythm. Even Bradbury himself voiced disappointment, saying the film misunderstood his novel. Audiences agreed. It flopped, vanishing quickly from theaters. Behind the camera, Truffaut struggled. He spoke little English, creating communication gaps with the cast. Werner and Christie clashed on set, and Truffaut later admitted the production nearly broke him emotionally. Universal had hoped for a critical darling, but instead found themselves embarrassed by the poor reception. Yet time redeemed it. The film's sterile, futuristic design and chilling score by Bernard Herrmann are now praised for their atmosphere. Scholars re-examined its themes of censorship, conformity, and media control, finding them prophetic. What once seemed a miscalculation now feels frighteningly relevant. Fahrenheit 451 stands as proof that a so-called failure can outlast its critics and speak louder to the future than the present. Number 14. Planet of the Apes, 1968. Today, it's considered one of the greatest science fiction films ever made, but when Planet of the Apes was first announced, it was mocked as absurd. Critics sneered at the idea of actors in ape costumes playing rulers of a future Earth. Even after release, many reviewers treated it as pulp spectacle, not serious cinema. Fox executives braced for financial embarrassment. The premise was bold. Charlton Heston as an astronaut who crash lands on a world ruled by intelligent apes, only to discover humanity's downfall. The ending, the shattered Statue of Liberty, was shocking, but early audiences didn't quite know what to make of it. Some called it gimmicky. Others dismissed it as too strange for mainstream success. Behind the scenes, skepticism reigned. The ape makeup required hours in the chair, and studio accountants worried the elaborate prosthetics would repel audiences. Heston himself feared it would end his career. But slowly, word of mouth grew. Foreign markets embraced it, and eventually, so did American television reruns. What was once derided as a bizarre misfire became a cultural milestone. Its sequels, merchandise, and influence on sci-fi storytelling are legendary. The lesson: what looks like folly to one generation can become the mythology of the next. Number 13. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 1966. Believe it or not, Sergio Leone's epic Western was not an immediate success in the United States. When it first arrived, critics accused it of being violent, vulgar, and too long. Some even dismissed it as a foreign imitation of real American Westerns, scorning Clint Eastwood's stoic performance and Ennio Morricone's haunting score. At the box office, it barely broke even in its early runs. The story followed three gunslingers, Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach, hunting buried gold across a Civil War-ravaged landscape. Its sprawling cinematography and operatic tension would later define the genre, but in the 1960s, reviewers complained about the lack of clear heroes and its grim tone. Behind the camera, production was fraught. The shoot in Spain was plagued with language barriers and near-fatal accidents, including explosions gone wrong. Eastwood clashed with Leone over creative control, while American distributors hacked away at the runtime, dulling its impact. But decades later, critics reversed course. Restored versions revealed Leone's true vision, a bleak, poetic meditation on greed and survival. Once dismissed as cheap foreign trash, it is now considered one of the greatest westerns ever made. Sometimes it takes time for audiences to see gold buried beneath the dust. Number 12. 2001. A Space Odyssey, 1968. It's hard to believe now, but Stanley Kubrick's magnum opus was a box office disappointment at first. Upon release, many audiences walked out, baffled by its wordless opening, cryptic symbolism, and glacial pacing. Critics mocked it as pretentious and incomprehensible. MGM executives panicked, fearing the costly experiment would destroy their studio. The story was audacious: the dawn of man, the rise of artificial intelligence, and humanity's leap into the unknown. HAL 9000, the computer that calmly rebels, became iconic. But in 1968, people were confused rather than inspired. Kubrick endured brutal reviews. Pauline Kael dismissed it as empty spectacle, and others complained it was more visual art than storytelling. Only later did younger audiences, many drawn by the counterculture, embrace it. Midnight screenings turned it into a mind-expanding experience. Behind the scenes, Kubrick's perfectionism pushed effects teams to innovate, creating visuals decades ahead of their time. The technical crew nearly collapsed under the workload, but Kubrick believed he was redefining cinema. He was right. Today, 2001, A Space Odyssey is ranked among the greatest films ever made. What began as a misunderstood flop evolved into a prophetic masterpiece about technology, evolution, and humanity's future. Number 11. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. When Bonnie and Clyde premiered, critics savaged it. The New York Times called it sick, while others accused it of glorifying criminals. Warner Brothers, nervous about the backlash, gave it only a limited release. For weeks, theaters sat half empty, and it seemed destined for obscurity. The story was explosive. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway as Depression-era outlaws, robbing banks and defying the law, all while living a doomed romance. Its shocking bursts of violence unsettled audiences. Critics complained the bloodshed was too realistic, too unsettling for Hollywood glamour. Behind the scenes, the studio nearly buried it. Executives didn't understand Arthur Penn's mix of French New Wave style and American outlaw myth. Beatty fought tirelessly to keep the film alive, arranging screenings for younger audiences who embraced it with passion. Slowly, word of mouth spread. In time, the tide shifted. What critics once dismissed as tasteless became recognized as revolutionary. Its editing, tone, and performances transformed American cinema, ushering in the new Hollywood era. Today, Bonnie and Clyde is hailed as a landmark, but in its first months, it was nearly abandoned. A reminder that innovation often wears the mask of failure before history redeems it. Number 10. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1964. It's now regarded as one of the sharpest satires in film history, but when Dr. Strangelove opened, many were horrified. A comedy about nuclear annihilation? To some, it felt tasteless, even unpatriotic. Critics accused Stanley Kubrick of mocking the Cold War at its most dangerous hour. American audiences were uneasy, and initial box office numbers reflected that discomfort. The film followed Peter Sellers in multiple roles, including the eccentric Dr. Strangelove, as a rogue general triggers a chain of events that may destroy the world. Its absurd humor and terrifying plausibility struck a nerve. Some politicians even condemned it as subversive propaganda. Behind the scenes, Columbia Pictures was terrified. The Cuban Missile Crisis had just rattled the globe, and releasing a black comedy about nuclear war felt reckless. Sellers himself was injured on set, forcing changes to his role. Kubrick, ever the perfectionist, clashed with cast and crew over tone and timing. Yet over time, the world caught up to Kubrick's vision. What once seemed irreverent is now viewed as prophetic. The film predicted bureaucratic absurdity, blind militarism, and the terrifying possibility of technological failure. A flop at first glance, Dr. Strangelove became a timeless warning, wrapped in laughter. Number 9. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. When John Ford's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance premiered, audiences expected a rousing Western with John Wayne and James Stewart. What they got was a somber, dialogue-heavy reflection on myth, morality, and the end of the frontier. Critics dismissed it as dull, and at the box office, it underperformed. Many declared the legendary Ford had lost his touch. The story was deceptively simple. Stewart's idealistic lawyer and Wayne's rugged cowboy face off against Lee Marvin's vicious outlaw, Liberty Valance. But the film dared to ask uncomfortable questions. Was progress built on truth or on myth and violence? Its famous line, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend," puzzled viewers more than it thrilled them. Behind the scenes, Ford's health was failing, and tensions simmered between his leads. Wayne bristled at playing second fiddle to Stewart, while Ford pushed the production into a stripped-down black-and-white aesthetic that confused audiences accustomed to Technicolor spectacle. Decades later, its quiet power emerged. Critics hailed it as one of Ford's greatest achievements, a meditation on American identity itself. What was once dismissed as a weary Western is now revered as poetry of the dying West. Number 8. Sweet Charity, 1969. Directed by choreographer Bob Fosse in his feature debut, Sweet Charity was meant to dazzle with music, movement, and style. Instead, it crashed. Critics were unkind and audiences stayed away, baffled by its cynical tone. Universal Pictures lost millions, branding it one of the decade's great flops. The story followed Charity Hope Valentine, hopelessly optimistic dancer played by Shirley MacLaine, as she sought love in a world that constantly betrayed her. Filled with iconic numbers like Big Spender and If My Friends Could See Me Now, it should have soared. Instead, reviewers called it too dark, too strange, too European in sensibility. Behind the scenes, Fosse clashed with producers who wanted a conventional musical. His insistence on stylized editing, surreal transitions, and a bleak ending alienated Hollywood traditionalists. MacLaine, though luminous, was criticized as miscast compared to Broadway's Gwen Verdon. Yet time has rewritten its fate. Fosse's daring style became the foundation for his legendary career. Today, Sweet Charity is celebrated as ahead of its time, its influence visible in musicals from Cabaret to Chicago. What failed as entertainment became history's blueprint for revolution. Number 7. The Graduate, 1967. It's shocking now, but when The Graduate first opened, its fate was uncertain. Some critics dismissed it as smutty, shallow, even immoral. MGM executives doubted that a story about a disillusioned college graduate having an affair with an older woman would resonate. Early box office numbers were modest, and few predicted it would survive beyond opening week. The story was deceptively simple. Dustin Hoffman as Benjamin Braddock, drifting in a haze of suburban alienation, seduced by Anne Bancroft's Mrs. Robinson, only to fall for her daughter. But its themes, rebellion, generational divide, and spiritual emptiness, struck deeper than audiences initially realized. Behind the scenes, director Mike Nichols faced pushback for his casting. Hoffman, short and nervous, was no Hollywood leading man. Bancroft, only 6 years older than Hoffman, was criticized as unbelievable in the role. Studio executives begged for safer choices. Nichols refused. Then came the shift. College students embraced it. Simon & Garfunkel's soundtrack became an anthem, and suddenly the film exploded into cultural relevance. By the time it left theaters, The Graduate had transformed from risky flop to cultural landmark. Today, it's remembered not as a failure, but as the voice of an era. Number 6. The Wild Bunch, 1969. When Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch exploded onto screens, audiences recoiled. Its slow-motion violence, bloody shootouts, and nihilistic worldview shocked even seasoned Western fans. Critics called it savage, gratuitous, and depraved. Censors debated banning it, and theater owners warned parents to keep their children away. At the box office, it stumbled, dismissed as a dangerous misfire. The story followed aging outlaws in Mexico facing the twilight of their era. But Peckinpah's vision was different. There were no clean heroes, only desperate men clinging to survival. Its final massacre, with bodies shredded in a hail of bullets, pushed cinema into uncharted territory. Behind the camera, chaos reigned. Peckinpah fought studio executives who wanted a safer cut. The budget swelled as reshoots piled up, and the cast endured punishing conditions in the desert heat. Hollywood insiders whispered that Peckinpah had gone mad, but history crowned it a turning point. What was once derided as grotesque is now hailed as a masterpiece that redefined violence on screen. Directors from Scorsese to Tarantino cited as inspiration. The Wild Bunch taught the world that cinema could be brutal, poetic, and unforgettable, even if audiences weren't ready in 1969. Number 5. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? 1966. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton at their most vicious. What could go wrong? At first, everything. Mike Nichols' adaptation of Edward Albee's play was deemed too raw, too venomous, too adult for mainstream audiences. Some theaters refused to screen it, fearing backlash. Critics were divided, with some praising its daring while others condemned it as toxic. The story unfolded in a single night of drunken arguments between two couples, with Taylor and Burton tearing into each other in a display of verbal brutality rarely seen on screen. It stripped away Hollywood glamour, leaving audiences shaken. Many expected it to fail commercially, and in its early weeks, attendance was spotty. Behind the scenes, Burton and Taylor's volatile marriage fueled the tension, blurring the line between acting and reality. The censors panicked at Albee's language, and the studio fought battles with the MPAA over dialogue never before spoken in American cinema. But as time passed, its genius emerged. The film won Oscars, reshaped the boundaries of acceptable content, and paved the way for new Hollywood realism. What was once scandalous is now a cornerstone of cinematic daring. Virginia Woolf turned failure into revolution. Number 4. Chitty, Chitty, Bang Bang, 1968. It was meant to be a whimsical family hit, penned by Ian Fleming and produced by the team behind Mary Poppins. Instead, Chitty, Chitty, Bang Bang sputtered at the box office. Critics dismissed it as bloated and uneven, with songs that failed to charm and a runtime that tested children's patience. United Artists took a heavy financial loss. The film followed inventor Caractacus Potts, played by Dick Van Dyke, as he builds a magical car and takes his children on fantastical adventures. But despite its lavish sets and colorful spectacle, many felt it lacked the heart of Mary Poppins. Reviewers sneered, calling it a second-rate imitation. Behind the scenes, tensions brewed. Van Dyke clashed with producers over direction, while the sprawling production ballooned costs far beyond expectations. Merchandising tie-ins failed, and critics declared it a flop. Yet, time transformed its reputation. Reruns on television and VHS turned Chitty Chitty Bang Bang into a beloved childhood memory for millions. The child catcher villain became iconic, and the film's eccentric whimsy gained cult devotion. What once sputtered is now remembered with fondness, proof that sometimes failure is just the first chapter of nostalgia. Number 3. Easy Rider, 1969. When Easy Rider first hit theaters, distributors weren't sure what to make of it. A low-budget road movie filled with non-traditional structure, countercultural themes, and rock music seemed doomed to fail. Early box office reports were modest, and critics branded it aimless and hippie propaganda. Studio executives doubted it would travel beyond college towns. The film followed Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper as bikers crossing America, financed by a drug deal, searching for freedom but finding violence and intolerance instead. Its mix of surreal editing, music-driven montages, and bleak ending unnerved audiences used to neat resolutions. Behind the scenes, production was combustible. Hopper's erratic behavior led to clashes with crew, while budget shortages forced improvisation. Columbia nearly shelved it, fearing it would alienate Middle America. But slowly, something shifted. Younger audiences embraced it as their story, their rebellion. Its soundtrack, The Byrds, Jimi Hendrix, Steppenwolf, became a cultural anthem. What was first written off as a scrappy outsider film grew into a box office sensation overseas and then back home. Today, Easy Rider is remembered as the birth of New Hollywood, proving that films once mocked as failures could ignite revolutions. Number 2. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, 1963. On paper, it had everything. A colossal all-star cast, a sprawling treasure hunt story, and slapstick comedy at epic scale. But when It's a Mad, 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 Mad World premiered, critics weren't kind. Some called it bloated, others accused it of trying too hard. With a 3-hour runtime and ticket sales that fell short of expectations, many saw it as a costly misstep. The film followed strangers racing across California to find a buried fortune, with cameos from nearly every major comic star of the era. Director Stanley Kramer, known for serious dramas, was accused of being out of his depth in comedy. Audiences laughed in places, but many also groaned at the sheer length. Early box office returns disappointed MGM executives, and some theaters demanded trimmed versions. Behind the scenes, the film was chaos. The cast was enormous. Spencer Tracy, Milton Berle, Ethel Merman, Sid Caesar, and wrangling them created scheduling nightmares. Stunts were ambitious, with crashes and physical gags that pushed safety limits. The spectacle overwhelmed the story, leaving some viewers cold. Yet history embraced it. Restorations revealed its dazzling scope, and nostalgia transformed it into a cult comedy epic. Today, it's considered a time capsule of comedic talent, celebrated not for perfection, but for ambition. Once dismissed as excessive, it is now remembered with affection and awe. Number 1. West Side Story, 1961. It may surprise you, but when West Side Story first danced onto the big screen, its reception was complicated. Critics were divided. Some praised its energy, while others mocked it as too theatrical, too stylized, even naive. The film struggled in certain markets, failing to recoup its enormous production costs quickly. For a moment, it teetered on the edge of being labeled a box office disappointment. The story was a modernized Romeo and Juliet. Rival gangs, the Jets and Sharks, divided by race and class in New York City. Natalie Wood and Richard Beymer led the cast, but early audiences found its mix of Broadway staging and cinematic realism jarring. Some even laughed at its earnestness. Behind the scenes, tension simmered. Jerome Robbins, the co-director and choreographer, was fired midway through for clashing with producers. Natalie Wood reportedly disliked her own performance, and her singing was dubbed without her consent. Despite winning critical awards, the film's shaky initial returns worried United Artists, but as time passed, the verdict changed. West Side Story grew into a phenomenon, earning 10 Academy Awards and becoming one of the most beloved musicals in history. Its choreography, music, and themes of prejudice resonate just as powerfully today. What once faltered at the box office became immortal, proof that greatness sometimes hides beneath rejection. The 1960s proved that failure is only the first draft of history. Films mocked, cut down, or ignored at release grew into legends that shaped cinema's future. Which of these bombs-turned-classics shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts below, hit like, and subscribe for more hidden Hollywood stories. Because sometimes, yesterday's flop is tomorrow's masterpiece.